In the 1920s, the women's liberation movement will continue. You have the Equal Rights Amendment, the ERA, being proposed in 1923. And what the ERA would do was remove any special legal protections that are based on gender. Okay. Remember in the past, we talked about how some states passed limited work hours for women, right? Where women don't have to work as many hours as men, technically, because the idea is that they're weaker, right? That whole ideology. Then also you had the mother's pensions. That's like a special protection for women, right? So if you have a single mother with kids, she can get money from the government to support her. It's basically like welfare. So what the ERA would do would remove these special legal protections, right? Because you have some feminists who believe that there should not be any type of differences between men and women, all right, in the economy or in politics. Women should have the same rights as men, right? No special privileges, right? Women should also get paid the same as men, right? Women should be able to have the same jobs as men, right? Because there's still some jobs where women are not hired during this time. So this movement to pass the Equal Rights Amendment was supported by some feminists like Alice Paul, right? Alice Paul and her organization, the National Women's Party, deeply supported the ERA. They wanted to see equal rights for women. They didn't want any of the special privileges, right? And so you see Paul and the National Women's Movement aggressively pushing for the Equal Rights Amendment to pass. Would be an amendment to the Constitution. So ultimately, the ERA failed, right? It didn't become an amendment to the Constitution. And a lot of women's rights organizations did not support the ERA, right? They differed with Alice Paul and the National Women's Party. But eventually, though, you will see the Supreme Court playing a role in all of this, because the Supreme Court is going to overturn several decisions that provided women with special privileges, right? So the idea that women could have reduced work hours, right? The Supreme Court overturned a law that provided reduced work hours for women, right? So in a sense, the Supreme Court was kind of supporting the idea behind the ERA. Same with minimum wage. The Supreme Court actually overturned a law that secured minimum wage for women. So in a sense, with these court decisions, the Supreme Court is doing something similar to what the ERA was asking for, right? Removing special privileges for women. The women's rights movement had a tremendous victory as well as we start to move into the 1920s. Technically, it started in 1919, but I'm talking about the passing of the 19th Amendment. Okay, here we have an amendment to the Constitution. And what is this about? Anyone know? The 19th Amendment? Well, the 19th Amendment is going to give voting rights to women on a national level. Women's rights organizations had some success earlier, before 1919, in gaining the right to vote, but only at the state level. Okay, states were passing laws which gave women the right to vote, but not at the national level, not until the 19th Amendment. Okay, so the 19th Amendment, it went before Congress, it was passed by Congress in 1919, and the states ratified it in 1920. So now women have the right to vote, and they did vote in a mass scale as we start to move into the 1920s. Okay, you also have a lot of individual freedom or social freedom for women during this time. And when I say individual freedom, I'm saying like there wasn't like some I'm not referring to like a law that covers like all women in the nation, but on an individual level, women were experiencing more freedom socially than they had previously in the earlier century, okay, in the 1800s, right? You see the rise of some women in society, mostly young unmarried women, known as flappers, okay? So in the 1920s, you see the rise of the flapper. And what is a flapper? It's a young woman, right? Usually unmarried woman, who breaks with the whole Victorian dress code. She's not wearing these big proper dresses. She's wearing short skirts or short dresses, and her hair is not all long and done up in curls and all that. No, she's cut her hair short, right? She's got the short bob going on, right? She's going out and partying, you know, she's not just staying at home and being under the control of her father, or, you know, if she were married, she's under the control of her husband. But most of the flappers, you know, were not married. But You have women going out partying, going to the clubs, right? Dancing to jazz music. They're more socially free during the 1920s than they were any time before in US history. So remember before we were talking about the CPI, and the CPI was this government agency that was trying to manipulate public opinion during World War I to try to get people to support the war. Well, the CPI actually urged businessmen to use similar tactics to change the public images of big business in the United States. Okay, because big business didn't have a great public image. Everyone thought they were greedy, selfish, and taking advantage of everybody, and heavily corrupt, which they were, right? But now business is going to try to manipulate that public image through ad campaigns, all right? So you have a number of businesses creating public relations departments. And their whole focus of these departments is to give a good public image to big business, all right? So you have a number of ad campaigns going out. In relation to women, I was talking about how the freedom of women, the social freedom of women, some companies are going to try to take advantage and make a profit off of that. Well, you got a guy by the name of Edward Bernays, right, who's working for a cigarette company, and he launches this hugely successful campaign to try to get women to start smoking cigarettes, right? He calls them torches of freedom. Okay, so go and light up a torch of freedom and show the world how women have social freedom now, right? It's a symbol. So if you see a woman smoking, that means like, hey, I'm independent, right? I'm not just at home. I'm out having a good time, enjoying my life, right? So women are now going to take up smoking because of this ad campaign. And you see here an example of the ad campaign, a flyer or a poster of a woman smoking, right? The short hair, the flapper, her freedom. Okay, so different directions of the women's liberation movement during the 1920s, right? You got the right to vote in the early 1920s, and you got individual freedom for young women who are going out and having a social life.